If you have ever known very clearly what you need to do and still stayed still, the problem is not that you lack motivation. The problem is that you are handing control of your life over to waiting. Every day you say tomorrow, you are not just delaying a task. You are teaching yourself that your words carry no weight. And the most dangerous part is that this happens in silence. No one sees it, no one reminds you, but it quietly decides the person you are becoming. This video is not here to excite you for a few minutes. It is here to end the state of standing on the sidelines of your own life. If you stay until the end, there is a strong chance you will no longer see starting the same way again. Change does not arrive when everything is ready. It arrives when you realize that if you keep waiting, you are handing control of your life over to the habit of delay. You have known this for a long time. You know what you need to do. You have read enough, listened enough, thought enough. Yet each day that passes, you still wait for the right feeling, a clear signal, an invisible permission to begin. That waiting is exactly what keeps you stuck. Not because you lack ability, not because you lack motivation, but because you are trapped in a familiar pattern where action is always postponed until tomorrow. When you face this truth directly, one thing becomes clear. Control is not given to you when you feel confident. Control appears when you act before confidence shows up. Every time you wait for emotion to lead, you teach yourself that you are not strong enough to move ahead of fear. And every time you move ahead of fear, even by one small step, you teach yourself that you are the one holding the wheel. This is not a story about doing something big. This is a story about ending the state of waiting, the state that lets days pass with a feeling of being busy but not moving forward, the state that keeps you feeling like you are preparing, but never truly starting. When you stop waiting, something important happens. The mind becomes clearer, not because you gain more information, but because movement creates order. When you act, even if that action is clumsy, you generate real data. And real data is stronger than any plan inside your head. You begin to see what needs adjustment, what needs to be removed, what needs to be kept. Control is built from moments like these, quiet, unnoticed, without the need for approval. Only the ability to keep your word to yourself. You might think you need a big push, but the truth is, you only need one small and decisive decision. The decision not to wait any longer. The decision to do one clear thing today. When you choose to act, you do not only change the outcome, you change the way you see yourself. You are no longer someone who waits for the right moment. You become the person who creates the moment. And when that identity begins to form, every other part of the journey starts to reorganize itself. This is the starting point, not of a new plan, but of a new person. Someone who no longer gives control to waiting. You have told yourself that you only need a little more. More understanding, more time, more confidence. One more perfect condition, then you will begin. It sounds reasonable, it sounds mature, but the truth is, this is the most subtle trap the mind creates to keep you exactly where you are. The illusion of readiness convinces you that action must wait for an ideal state, that you need to feel certain before you move, that you need to see the entire path before taking the first step. But life does not work that way. There is no moment when you feel completely ready for a real step forward. If that feeling exists, the step is already too safe to create change. The readiness you are waiting for is actually a desire to avoid the discomfort of starting without certainty. And the mind is very skilled at disguising this avoidance as logic. It says you are preparing, it says you are learning, it says you are planning carefully. But beneath all of that lies a simple truth. You are delaying action because you do not want to face the awkwardness of the first steps. Each day you wait a little longer, you reinforce a dangerous habit, not the habit of doing nothing, but the habit of believing you need perfect conditions to begin. And when that belief takes root, it does not keep you stuck in just one area. it spreads into every other area of life. You wait until you feel skilled enough to speak. You wait until you feel confident enough to change. You wait until you feel certain enough to commit. Eventually, you become someone who stands on the sidelines of your own life, observing, analyzing, thinking, but rarely stepping onto the field. The irony is that the feeling of readiness you crave only appears after you act. Without movement, there is no clarity. Without clarity, there is no confidence. Confidence is not the condition for starting. It is the byproduct of starting and continuing. When you act, you send a new signal to the brain. You say that you are someone capable of facing uncertainty, and each time you do this, even when the result is rough, you raise your own inner standard. You teach yourself that you do not need to be perfect to move forward. You only need to be honest with the next step. The illusion of readiness also distorts how you see those who came before you. You see their results and assume they started from a stronger position, but you do not see the phase where they worked in confusion. You do not see the adjustments they made while moving. You only see the refined version, and your mind uses that image to justify more waiting. When you understand this, a deep release happens. You do not need to eliminate fear. You do not need to feel ready. You only need to stop treating readiness as a requirement. When you do that, the mental pressure drops away. You no longer carry the burden of needing to be right from the beginning. You only need to move one real step. One step you can take right now within your current circumstances. When you choose that step, you break the quiet trap of delay that has held you back for too long. And in that moment, you begin to feel something different. Not excitement, but steadiness. A steadiness that comes from knowing you are no longer controlled by illusion. You are someone who acts even when things are not perfect. And that is the true foundation of all lasting change. There is an uncomfortable truth you need to face if you want to move forward. You are not stuck because you do not know enough. You are stuck because you know too much and have not transformed that knowledge into lived action. You understand the principles, you understand what should be done. You can even explain it clearly to others, but when it is your turn, you repeat the same circle. You think more, you prepare more, and then you stop right before the moment where you need to move. This is not a lack of intelligence. This is a familiar psychological pattern. A pattern that many adults fall into after they have accumulated enough knowledge but have not built a matching identity of action. This pattern begins with an unspoken belief. That understanding will automatically lead to change. That if you keep learning more, reading more, listening more, one day you will be different. But reality moves in the opposite direction. The more knowledge you accumulate without action, the heavier you feel. You begin to doubt yourself, not because you do not know what to do, but because you see the growing gap between what you know and how you live. That gap creates inner resistance. It drains you before you even begin. It causes every intention to act to come with a quiet question. Why will this time be different? And when that question has no clear answer, you return to the same place. This is the danger of the stuck pattern. It does not make you fail loudly. It leaves you drifting in a state of knowing a lot, but not moving. Each day, you remain busy. You keep thinking. You keep planning. But inside, there is a clear feeling of standing still. That feeling builds over time. It turns into quiet frustration, then into self-doubt. You begin to wonder whether you are truly someone who can change. And this is even more dangerous because from the outside, everything still looks fine. You are not collapsing. You are not losing control. You are simply not going anywhere. This pattern is maintained by a subtle mechanism of the mind. The mind enjoys the feeling of understanding. Understanding creates the illusion of progress. When you grasp a new idea, the brain releases a mild sense of satisfaction. This feeling closely resembles the feeling of real progress, and if you are not careful, you will confuse the two. You will believe you are growing when in reality you are only collecting concepts. But real growth always comes with friction. It feels uncomfortable. It makes you awkward. It forces you to confront your current limits. and because of that, the mind will do everything it can to keep you in the safe zone of understanding. It tells you that you are not ready yet. It tells you that you need more time. It tells you that you need a more perfect system. But if you look closely, you will see that all of these justifications lead to the same outcome. No new movement, no new experience, no new data to adjust from, and without new data, you cannot escape the old pattern. The important thing to realize here is that the problem is not knowledge. The problem is order. You have reversed the order of growth. You placed understanding before action, when in reality, action is what creates deep understanding. People who move forward do not do so because they understand more. They move forward because they are willing to act before they fully understand. And it is through action that real understanding is formed. When you see this, a heavy pressure drops away. You no longer need to find more answers before you begin. You only need to find one step small enough to break the pattern. One step that pulls you out of living only in your head. That step does not need to be perfect. It only needs to be real. Real enough that you can feel the shift in your body as you do it. It might be starting when you are not confident. It might be making a public commitment while still afraid of judgment. It might be finishing something unfinished instead of endlessly refining it in your mind. Whatever that step is, it must share one quality. It takes you out of the old loop. When you do this, even once, you will feel a clear difference, not excitement, but lightness. The lightness of no longer being in conflict with yourself. The lightness of living in alignment with what you already know. And that moment is the sign that you are breaking free from the stuck pattern, not by thinking more, but by living differently. From here, your journey begins to shift direction, no longer centered on learning more, but centered on becoming someone who acts consistently. And when that happens, every next part of change finally has space to take form. There is a cost you have been paying for years, yet you rarely call it by its real name. It is not money. It is not obvious failure. It is the slow erosion of personal control. Each day you delay something you know you should do. You do not only miss an external opportunity, you lose a piece of inner trust. The trust that you are someone who keeps your word to yourself. The trust that when you decide, you act. This cost does not appear immediately. It is not loud. It accumulates in silence. It shows up as persistent fatigue, as a heavy feeling whenever you think about important things, as familiar hesitation before choices that could move you forward. Every time you say tomorrow, the mind records it, not as a single event, but as evidence. Evidence that your words do not necessarily lead to action. And when enough of that evidence builds up, the mind stops taking your decisions seriously. You begin to live in a dangerous state. You still set goals, you still have good intentions, but inside, you no longer feel the weight of promises made to yourself. This is the greatest cost of not starting. It weakens the relationship between you and yourself. The irony is that you may not notice it until it has gone very far. Because on the outside, life continues. You fulfill responsibilities, you maintain a stable image, but inside, there is a clear sense that you are living below your capacity. This feeling does not make you collapse. It makes you accept a smaller version of yourself as normal. And that is when the invisible cost becomes dangerous. It does not take everything at once. It takes your inner standards. Each time you do not start, you lower the standard of who you believe you are. You begin to compromise with delay. You rationalize waiting. You say the circumstances are not right. You say the timing is not right. You say you need more preparation. And each time, you teach yourself that staying the same is safe. But safety is not free. Safety has a cost. That cost is delayed growth, untouched potential, versions of yourself that never get lived. There is a kind of exhaustion that rest cannot fix. It is the exhaustion of knowing you should move forward, but not doing it. You can rest more. You can distract yourself more, but the heaviness remains. Because it does not come from lack of energy. It comes from inner conflict between what you know is right and what you do each day. This invisible cost also shows up in how you see the future. When you delay for too long, the future becomes vague. Not because you lack dreams, but because you cannot see a concrete path toward them. And when the future is vague, the present loses momentum. You live day to day on autopilot. You do familiar tasks. You avoid things that could create real change. And slowly, you get used to living without expecting much from yourself. This does not happen in a week or a month. It happens over years, through hundreds of small decisions postponed, through hundreds of times you told yourself that today was not necessary. When you add all of those moments together, you see that the real cost is not one missed opportunity. It is that you have gradually become someone who trusts your own ability to act less and less. And when that trust weakens, every future attempt at change becomes many times harder. But this is also where a freeing truth appears. If the cost of not starting is the erosion of control, then the benefit of starting comes from the same direction. Every small action you take today is a direct investment in inner trust. When you do something you have been delaying, even something small, you send a clear message to the mind that your words carry weight, that your decisions are reliable, and this message is more powerful than any motivation. It does not need emotional highs. It only needs repetition. You do not need to fix your entire life in one day. You only need to stop paying the invisible cost for one more day. You only need to choose not to delay one important thing today. When you do that, you do not just complete a task. You begin to restore the relationship between you and yourself. And when that relationship is healed, the rest of the journey no longer has to drag you forward. It will be guided by something stronger, self-respect, built through action. And that is the true foundation for moving ahead. Fear does not appear to stop you from moving forward. It appears to test whether you are truly willing to take responsibility for your next step. You were taught that fear is a sign of danger, that when you feel afraid you should stop, wait longer, look for a safer path. But the truth is that during the most important phases of life, fear always accompanies the right direction. Not because the path is wrong, but because the path forces you to leave your old version behind. Fear is a natural response of the inner protection system when you are about to enter unfamiliar territory. It cannot distinguish between real danger and necessary change. It only knows that what is coming has not been experienced before, and so it sends a warning signal. The issue is not whether fear exists. The issue is how you interpret it. When you treat fear as the enemy, you give it decision-making power. You allow a temporary feeling to control your long-term direction. You begin to live by the principle of avoiding discomfort instead of the principle of growth. And at that point, fear does not need to do anything else. It only needs to appear, and you stop yourself. But when you look at fear differently, everything changes. When you see fear as a directional signal, you notice that it often shows up right before steps that can expand your life. You feel fear when you are about to speak up, because it might change how others see you. You feel fear when you are about to start, because it might expose your early clumsiness. You feel fear when you are about to commit, because it forces you to keep your word. Fear appears not because you are weak, but because the step matters. When you understand this, you no longer need to eliminate fear before acting. You only need to stop treating it as a reason to stop. You can be afraid and still move forward. These two things do not cancel each other out. In fact, that is the only way real growth happens. Every time you act while fear is still present, you reset the power relationship between you and your emotions. You are no longer led by feeling, you begin to lead feeling through action. And this is the key point that very few people realize. Fear does not disappear when you think more. It disappears when you collect evidence that you can face it and still be okay. Every small action you take while afraid is such evidence. You send the brain a new message. That discomfort does not equal danger. That you can tolerate uncertainty. That you are capable of adapting. Over time, the brain adjusts. It reduces the intensity of its alarms, not because you become reckless, but because you become trustworthy in your own eyes. There is a common misunderstanding that keeps many people stuck. They believe that strong people are those who do not feel fear, but in reality, those who go far are the ones who do not let fear act as the judge of their decisions. They listen to fear, but they do not hand power to it. They understand that emotion is information, not an order. When you begin to operate by this principle, you will notice a subtle but deep shift. You no longer wait for the right feeling to begin. You begin, and let the feeling adjust to the action. This completely reverses how you used to operate. Before, you waited for emotion to lead. Now, you let action lead, and emotion follows. This does not make life easy right away, but it makes life clearer. You know that every time fear appears, you are standing at a threshold. You can step back into the familiar zone, or you can step through, even while your heart is racing, even while your mind is doubting. Every time you choose to step through, you do not just move farther on the outside. You expand your inner boundaries. You become someone who can hold more responsibility, more freedom. And when you look back, you will realize something important. Fear was never your enemy. It was only the gatekeeper, and your task was never to defeat it. Your task was to walk through the door when it opened. When you do this enough times, fear no longer controls you. It becomes a sign that you are moving in the right direction. And from here, your journey enters a new phase. A phase where movement, even small movement, begins to create real clarity. Clarity does not come from sitting down and thinking more. It comes from moving. When you stay still, everything in your mind feels possible. You imagine countless scenarios. You weigh endless risks. You exaggerate every obstacle. But when you begin to move, even in a very small way, the world starts to respond. And it is that response that creates real clarity. Small movement has a power that most people underestimate. It breaks stagnation. It creates friction with reality. And that friction reveals what works and what does not. When you only think, you work with assumptions. When you act, you work with real data. Real data does not need to be perfect. It only needs to exist. One small step is enough to show you how the next step should be adjusted. This is how life teaches you, not through theory, but through direct feedback. There is a common misunderstanding that causes many people to wait far too long. They believe they need clarity before they act, but in reality, the order is reversed. You need to act first in order to create clarity. Clarity is the result of movement, not the condition for it. When you accept this, mental pressure drops significantly. You no longer have to find answers to everything before you begin. You only need to find one action small enough to do right now. That action does not need to be clever. It does not need to be optimal. It only needs to be real. When you do that, you start to see things you could not see from a stationary position. You see which obstacles are real and which are just exaggerated fear. You see what is within your control and what is not. And more importantly, you begin to feel the rhythm of progress. This rhythm is very different from short-lived excitement. It is calmer, more stable. It feels like you are moving in the right direction, even when the entire path is not yet visible. Small movement also has a deep impact on how you see yourself. Every time you do something you once delayed, you update your self-image. You are no longer just someone with good intentions. You become someone who acts. This change happens quietly, but it accumulates. Over time, you begin to trust your own ability in a very different way. Not because you tell yourself that you are strong, but because you have seen evidence. You have seen yourself act before you were ready. You have seen yourself adjust while moving. You have seen yourself continue even when things were not perfect. These pieces of evidence create a durable form of confidence, not based on emotion, based on lived experience. Small movement also helps you escape the trap of thinking too far ahead. When you look at a large goal from a place of stillness, it can feel overwhelming. You see too much to do, too much to change, and the mind responds by delaying as a form of self-protection. But when you break that goal into one small movement right in front of you, the mental burden lightens. You no longer have to solve the entire future. You only have to handle this step, and once this step is completed, the next step becomes clearer. This is how real progress happens, not through big leaps, but through consecutive steps taken with enough focus. There is one important thing you need to understand so you do not sabotage the power of small movement. Do not treat it as temporary. Do not think you will do something small for now and wait to do something big later. When you do that, you are still delaying at a more subtle level. Small movement is not a weaker version of big movement. It is the foundation of all big movement. Every strong habit begins with a very small action repeated long enough. Every solid identity is built from small choices, maintained consistently. When you respect small movement, you respect your natural process of growth. You do not force it, you do not rush it. You allow yourself to move forward at a pace you can sustain. And this ability to sustain is what ultimately determines how far you go. Small movement also frees you from dependence on motivation. Motivation comes and goes, but movement can happen even when strong emotion is absent. When you commit to one small action each day, you do not need to wait for inspiration. You only need to show up, and every time you show up, you reinforce the identity of someone who keeps their word. This identity gradually becomes an inner anchor. With that anchor in place, you are no longer easily shaken by mood or circumstance. You know you have a steady rhythm to return to. Finally, small movement teaches you a crucial lesson about control. Control is not about managing everything. It is about always being able to choose the next step. No matter the circumstances, no matter the mood, you can always choose one small action to move forward. When you live by this principle, your life begins to change in a very different way. Not loudly, not dramatically, but sustainably. And from that sustainability, real clarity begins to emerge. You no longer ask yourself what to do next from a place of confusion. You look at what you have already done, and from there, the path opens. This is the foundation for the next stage of the journey. The stage where you learn to let go of perfection in order to choose progress, and that choice will take you farther than you ever expected. One of the strongest forces holding you back on the path of change is not laziness, but the desire to make everything perfect. This desire is often disguised very skillfully. It tells you that you have high standards. It tells you that you respect quality. It tells you that you do not want to do things halfway. But when you look deeper, you will see that perfection is often a socially acceptable form of fear. You are afraid of doing poorly. You are afraid of being judged. You are afraid of seeing the gap between where you are and where you want to be. And to avoid those feelings, you choose not to act until everything looks perfect in your mind. The brain likes this strategy because it keeps you in the safe zone. When you delay in the name of perfection, you do not have to face the possibility of real failure. You only face an idea of failure in the future, and that idea is far more comfortable than real experience. But the cost of this is stalled progress. Every day you keep refining in your head, you create no new data. Without new data, you cannot learn. Without learning, you cannot move forward. This is the paradox of perfection. It promises quality, but it sabotages growth. When you begin to prioritize progress over perfection, the brain resists. It offers very convincing reasons. It tells you to wait longer to do it better. It tells you that the current version does not represent you well enough. It tells you that if you do it now, you will regret it. This is not higher intuition. This is a protective reflex. The brain is attached to stability. It treats unfinished work as a threat. And so every time you choose progress, you challenge a long-standing habit of the nervous system. What matters most at this point is not arguing with the brain. Arguing only pulls you back into thinking loops. What you need instead is a new standard. This standard does not ask whether something is perfect. It only asks whether it moves you forward. When you apply this standard consistently, you create a very clear decision frame. You are no longer trapped in endless evaluation. You look at an action and ask yourself whether it moves you forward even slightly. If it does, you do it. If it does not, you let it go. This frame is simple, but it is powerful because it cuts through hesitation. Every time you do something imperfect, you send a new signal to the brain. You tell it that progress matters more than protecting your image. And when this signal is repeated enough times, the brain begins to adjust. It learns that acting before perfection does not lead to disaster. It learns that you can correct while moving. It learns that the world does not collapse just because you were not perfect at the start. Over time, the resistance weakens, not because you become careless, but because you become more flexible. You begin to understand that high quality is not the starting point. It is the result of many small cycles of progress. No one does things well the first time. They do things well because they allow themselves to do them poorly many times. When you live by the principle of progress, you also release a large amount of mental energy. Energy that was once spent worrying about right and wrong is now used to do and adjust. You no longer carry the burden of needing to perform perfectly. You only need to show up and improve. This creates a very different rhythm of life. The rhythm of someone who is actually building something real. This rhythm may be slow, but it is durable. And this durability is what creates meaningful results over time. Choosing progress over perfection also changes how you experience failure. When you chase perfection, every mistake feels like proof that you are not good enough. When you chase progress, every mistake becomes information. Information that helps you adjust. Information that helps you aim more accurately. This completely transforms the learning experience. You no longer learn in a state of tension. You learn in a state of exploration. And when learning feels lighter, you are willing to continue longer. This is a powerful advantage that few people recognize. Finally, when you choose progress consistently, you begin to build a new identity. The identity of someone who finishes. Someone who does not wait for perfection to act. Someone who trusts their ability to refine along the way. This identity is stronger than any technique, because when you believe you are someone who progresses, you naturally find ways to move forward in any situation. From this foundation, the next parts of the journey become possible. You no longer need to force yourself. You only need to maintain this standard. Each day, one small step forward, and from those small steps, a very different life is slowly built. There is a subtle escape from facing reality, and it is preparing endlessly without ever stepping into real action. Preparation feels safe. It gives you the sense that you are doing something useful. You read more. You learn more. You refine more. You wait for a better version of yourself to appear before you begin. But if you are honest with yourself, you will see that most of this preparation does not move you closer to real experience. It only extends the distance between you and action. Endless preparation is a socially accepted form of delay. No one criticizes someone who is learning. No one judges someone who is preparing. And because of that, many people hide in this state for years. They become theoretical experts of their own lives, while their real lived experience remains thin. The problem is not learning. The problem is order. When you place learning before action for too long, you demand certainty in a world that only offers clarity through experience. The most important lessons do not live in books or courses. They live in friction with reality. You only learn how to communicate when you speak and listen to feedback. You only learn how to lead when you make decisions and take responsibility. You only learn how to persist when you continue on days without emotion. These lessons cannot be fully understood before you live them. Too much preparation causes you to misjudge yourself. You think you are not good enough to start, when in reality, you simply lack real data to feel confident, and real data only appears when you act. Each time you do something real, even if the result is rough, you collect valuable information. You learn what works, you learn what does not. You learn how you respond when things get difficult. These insights are deeper than any theory, because they are directly tied to your experience. When you learn through action, the learning process becomes alive. It is no longer about memorizing concepts, it is about adjusting behavior. And adjusting behavior is what creates lasting change. There is a big difference between understanding a principle and believing in it. Belief does not come from hearing the right words. It comes from doing and seeing results. When you act and see that you can handle situations that are harder than you expected, a new belief forms. The belief that you can adapt, the belief that you do not need to know everything before you begin. This belief is powerful because it is built on personal experience, not on advice from others. Learning through action also saves time and energy. Instead of preparing for every possible scenario, you prepare only for the one that is happening. You do not carry the weight of the entire future. You focus on the present. When a problem appears, you handle it. When a mistake happens, you adjust. This approach is simple but effective because it matches how life actually works. Life does not give you a complete map. It gives you one stretch of road at a time. As you move forward, the key is that you must walk for the path to appear. You may worry that if you do not prepare enough, you will do things wrong. But doing things wrong is not the most frightening outcome. The most frightening outcome is never giving yourself the chance to learn from being wrong. Every corrected mistake is a step forward. Every adjustment is a new layer of understanding. When you avoid mistakes by avoiding action, you also avoid growth. Learning through action requires accepting the feeling of being unfinished. This feeling is uncomfortable, but it is the sign of real learning. When you feel awkward, you are expanding your capacity. When you find yourself reconsidering, you are restructuring how you operate. These are positive signals, not problems. When you begin to see them this way, you stop being afraid of starting before you feel ready. You understand that readiness is built in the process of doing. Finally, when you shift from endless preparation to learning through action, you completely change your role in your own life. You are no longer someone waiting for perfect conditions. You become someone who learns directly from experience. This person does not need to know everything before moving. This person only needs enough courage to step in and enough humility to adjust. And from that attitude, a very different kind of strength is formed. The strength of someone who keeps learning because they keep living for real. This is a critical transition that brings you into the next stage. The stage where finishing becomes more important than looking right. And from there, a new identity continues to be built. There is a moment where many people stop, not because they cannot continue, but because what they are doing no longer looks like what they imagined at the beginning. Reality is always rougher than ideas. When you imagine, everything flows. When you act, you collide. And this moment of collision decides a great deal. You can withdraw to protect the image in your mind, or you can stay and finish, even when the result is not yet beautiful. Finishing while it is still rough is an important skill, yet it is rarely taught, because the culture around you usually celebrates only the polished final product. You see the finished results of others, but you do not see the phase where they struggled. You compare your rough stage to someone else's refined stage and conclude that you are not good enough. This conclusion is convenient for the mind, because it allows you to stop without facing the discomfort of incompletion. But every time you stop at the rough stage, you reinforce a dangerous message that you are only worthy of finishing when everything looks right. And that message slowly shapes a weak identity, the identity of someone who continues only when things are easy. In contrast, when you choose to finish even while things are rough, you build a completely different identity, the identity of someone who does not quit. This person does not finish to prove anything to others. This person finishes to keep their word to themselves. And that creates a very different sense of self-respect. Not confidence built on praise, but steadiness built on experience. Every time you finish something you once wanted to abandon, you create new evidence. Evidence that you can stay with discomfort. Evidence that you can go to the end, even when the path is uneven. These pieces of evidence accumulate. They change how you face the next challenges. You no longer react by avoiding. You react by finding a way to continue. Finishing while it is still rough also frees you from the trap of judging too early. When you stop halfway, you never get the chance to see what can actually be improved. You only see half the problem. But when you go to the end, you have a complete picture. You see what truly needs adjustment, what can be ignored, what is better than you expected. From there, improvement becomes concrete. You no longer fix things in abstraction, you fix them on something that already exists. This saves a great deal of mental energy. Instead of repeating the same beginning over and over, you build on what has been completed. This is how people who go far work. They do not restart each time. They revise. Finishing while it is still rough also changes how you experience failure. When you do not finish, everything remains a potential failure. But when you finish, failure becomes a concrete outcome. And a concrete outcome can be analyzed, learned from, and improved. Vague failure creates fear. Concrete failure creates strength. This is a crucial difference that only those who go to the end truly understand. You may worry that finishing something imperfect will damage your image. But look more closely. What truly damages your inner image is not an imperfect product. It is the chain of things you leave unfinished. Each unfinished thing leaves a mark in the mind, a mark that says you often stop when things get hard. And that mark influences how you enter the next challenge. In contrast, every completed thing, even if rough, leaves a different mark. A mark of reliability. You know that you can go to the end, and when you know that, you enter new challenges from a very different foundation. You no longer fear the length of the path. You trust your ability to continue. Finishing while it is still rough also helps you detach your self-worth from immediate results. When you allow yourself to finish in an imperfect state, you separate your value from the product. You are no longer the result. You are the person who creates the result. And this separation is vital for mental health. It allows you to experiment. It allows you to learn. It allows you to evolve without being paralyzed by fear of judgment. Finally, when you repeat the act of finishing enough times, a new identity forms. You no longer need to force yourself to continue. You simply are someone who continues. This person does not need emotional highs. This person does not need ideal circumstances. This person only needs one simple principle: start and go to the end. This principle is not flashy, but it produces results. And from those results, a very different inner strength begins to appear. The strength of someone who knows they do not quit when things become difficult. This is the foundation that allows you to enter the next stage. The stage where consistent rhythm begins to shape your life in a quiet but irreversible way. No major turning point appears without a steady rhythm behind it. Lasting change is not created by explosive days that disappear, but by ordinary days repeated with a clear standard. Consistent rhythm quietly shapes your life because it determines who you become when no one is watching. Each day you show up on time for something important. You send yourself a powerful message that you are reliable, that you do what you say. That promises to yourself carry weight. Inner trust does not come from telling yourself you are strong. It comes from witnessing yourself keep rhythm on days with no emotional support. There are days when you feel clear and energized, but most days are simply ordinary. It is within those ordinary days that consistent rhythm shows its true power. When you do what needs to be done, even without motivation, you lay the foundation for self-respect. And this self-respect is very different from outward confidence. It is not loud. It does not need recognition. It sits deep inside, like a solid pillar. Consistent rhythm also frees you from dependence on emotion. When you live by emotion, every small fluctuation can knock you off course. One tired day can break an entire week. One minor disruption can cause you to abandon a whole plan. But when you have rhythm, Emotion becomes weather. It comes and goes. Rhythm becomes climate. It is more stable, and it is this climate that determines the ecosystem of your life. There is a misunderstanding that causes many people to break their rhythm. They believe consistency means doing more every day. In reality, consistency means doing enough and doing it regularly. When you design a rhythm that exceeds what you can sustain, you create a breaking point. You may hold it for a short time, but eventually you will burn out. And when rhythm breaks, inner trust is damaged. That is why a strong rhythm is not a fast rhythm. It is a rhythm you can keep on your worst days. When you design rhythm based on your real capacity, you create stability. This stability allows you to continue even when life is unfavorable. Each time you keep rhythm in difficult conditions, inner trust rises another level. You begin to know that you can rely on yourself, and this feeling is very different from temporary motivation. It is deeper, more grounded. Consistent rhythm also changes how you see the future. When you have no rhythm, the future feels vague and intimidating. You do not know where you are going. You are not sure if you will continue. But when you have rhythm, the future becomes concrete. You do not need to know the exact final outcome. You only need to know that if you keep rhythm, you will move forward. This certainty reduces anxiety. It helps you focus on what you do today, instead of worrying about everything that might happen. Consistent rhythm also builds a new relationship with time. Instead of seeing time as something that passes, you begin to see it as an ally. Each day you keep rhythm is a brick placed in the right spot. You do not see the building immediately, but you know it is being built. And this belief makes continuing feel natural. You no longer need to convince yourself every day. You simply show up and do your part. Once rhythm is established, many things that once felt difficult become easier. Not because they are simpler, but because you now have a supporting structure. You do not need to decide again each day. The decision was made earlier. You only need to execute. This frees a large amount of mental energy. Energy that was once spent wrestling with hesitation is now used to improve quality. Finally, consistent rhythm turns action into identity. You are no longer someone trying to be disciplined. You are someone with rhythm. You no longer ask yourself whether you should act. You know that you will act, and when you live with that certainty, your life begins to change in a way that is very hard to reverse. From here, something else important emerges. When rhythm is solid, your actions begin to carry weight. They become an inner voice of leadership, and that voice will guide you through the more difficult stages ahead. There is an important moment in the journey of growth that very few people recognize while it is happening. It is the moment when your actions begin to speak to you more powerfully than your thoughts. Before, you made decisions by persuading yourself. You argued in your head. You weighed right and wrong. You searched for more reasons to begin or to delay. But once a consistent rhythm is established, a subtle shift takes place. You no longer need to convince yourself as much as before. Your repeated actions have become living evidence, and that evidence creates a new voice inside you, the voice of inner leadership. This voice is not loud. It does not shout. It does not promise distant results. It simply reminds you that you are someone who has shown up on difficult days. You are someone who has continued when no one was forcing you. When you hear that voice, you no longer feel like you are trying to become someone else. You feel like you are living in alignment with the person you are becoming. Inner leadership does not come from commanding yourself. It comes from proving to yourself that you are trustworthy. Each time you do what you say, you strengthen that leadership position. Each time you ignore what you committed to, you weaken it. But when rhythm is solid, right action becomes reflex. You do not need intense motivation. You do not need pressure from the outside. You simply look at what needs to be done, and you do it. This creates a sense of power very different from rigid control. It is quiet power, the power of someone who knows they can lead themselves. When action becomes the voice of leadership, the way you face challenges also changes. Before, when difficulty appeared, you might have asked whether you were capable enough. Now that question no longer carries the same weight. because you have a history of action behind you. You have faced difficulty before and continued. That history speaks for you. It tells you that you do not need to be certain about everything to move forward. You only need to keep rhythm and adjust when necessary. This reduces a great deal of anxiety. You no longer feel like you are stepping into the unknown without support. Your support is your past self, the one who has already done things that were harder than you expected. Inner leadership also changes how you make decisions. You no longer decide based on what feels most comfortable in the short term. You decide based on what aligns with the standard you have built. That standard is not perfection. It is consistency. It is progress. When you face a choice, you do not ask what will help you avoid discomfort. You ask which action matches the rhythm you have committed to. This question is simple but powerful. It cuts through noise. It helps you choose faster. And each time you choose this way, the inner leadership voice grows clearer. There is one important thing you need to understand, so you do not disrupt this process. Inner leadership does not mean that doubt never appears. Doubt still shows up. Fear still shows up. Fatigue still shows up. The difference is that these feelings are no longer sitting in the driver's seat. They sit in the back seat. You listen to them, but you do not let them decide direction. Your consistent action has taken control, and this control does not need to be reaffirmed every day with words. It is maintained by continued presence. When action becomes the voice of leadership, you also change how you speak to yourself. Before, your inner voice may have been filled with criticism. Every mistake was proof that you were not good enough. Every missed beat was a reason for self-blame. But when you have a history of action, that voice softens. Not because you lower standards, but because you understand process. You know that one off day does not erase everything you have built. You know that what matters is returning. And so you treat yourself with disciplined compassion. You do not ignore mistakes, but you do not let them define you. This creates a very different inner environment, one where you can continue long-term without burning out. Inner leadership also affects how others see you, even when you are not trying to present anything. When you act consistently, your words begin to carry more weight. Not because you speak better, but because you live consistently. Others may not know the details of what you do each day, but they feel the stability, and that stability creates trust. But more importantly, you no longer need that recognition to keep going. You already have internal validation. You know you are moving in the right direction because you are living by your own standard. When you reach this stage, many things that once felt difficult become simpler, not because they are easy, but because you no longer struggle internally as much as before. You no longer have to decide every day whether you are serious or not. That decision has already been closed by repeated action. You only need to keep walking, and with each step, the inner voice of leadership becomes stronger. From this foundation, a deeper change begins to form. You no longer act only for results, you act because this is who you are. Action and identity begin to merge, and when that happens, motivation is no longer the central issue. The central issue is that you are living in alignment with yourself. This is a place very few people reach, but once reached, the journey is no longer easily reversed. And from here, you move into a new phase. A phase where you learn to look back at the distance you have traveled in order to sustain long-term momentum. Instead of focusing only on how far you still have to go, there is a very common mistake that causes many people to quit even after they have come a meaningful distance. They look only forward, they see only what remains, and because what remains is always larger than what has been done, they feel insufficient, behind, as if nothing significant has been achieved. This way of seeing quietly drains motivation, not because you have not progressed, but because you fail to acknowledge your own progress. When you measure yourself only by where you have not yet arrived, you live in a constant state of lack, and that state is extremely difficult to sustain over time. Measuring the distance you have traveled is not complacency. It is a survival skill if you want to go far. When you look back at what you have already overcome, you create the right context for your current effort. You remember where you started. You remember what you used to fear. You remember how awkward the first steps felt. And when you compare who you are now with who you were before, one truth becomes clear. You have changed more than you think. This recognition does not slow you down. It steadies you. It creates a sense of forward motion grounded in reality, not illusion. Sustainable motivation does not come from constantly pushing yourself. It comes from seeing that small efforts are adding up to something meaningful. When you measure the distance you have traveled, you give your mind evidence that continuing makes sense. The brain needs evidence. It needs to see that the energy you invest is creating value. If you do not show it that, it will try to stop in order to conserve. This is not weakness, it is a survival mechanism. When you actively acknowledge progress, you work with this mechanism instead of against it. There are subtle ways to measure the distance you have traveled, not by comparing yourself to others, not by counting only big outcomes, but by looking at changes in behavior. You start earlier than before, you delay less than before, you return faster after losing rhythm, you finish more things instead of abandoning them. These changes may not impress from the outside, but they are clear signs of inner growth. When you notice them, you reinforce the identity of someone who moves forward. You no longer see yourself as someone trying to change. You see yourself as someone who has been changing and is still changing. This distinction matters. It shifts you from striving into maintaining, and maintaining is where large results are formed. Measuring the distance you have traveled also helps you handle off-rhythm days in a healthier way. When you look only forward, one off day can feel like total failure. You feel as if you are back at the starting line, but when you hold a broader view of the path behind you, one off day becomes a small ripple. You know it does not erase everything you have built, and because of that, you do not spiral into self-blame and quitting. You adjust and continue. This is the difference between someone built for the long road and someone running short sprints. The long road person understands that progress is never a straight line. It is a sequence of steps forward and corrections along the way. When you learn to see it this way, you free yourself from the pressure of needing to be perfect. You allow yourself to be human as long as you return. Another important aspect of measuring the distance you have traveled is that it helps you maintain gratitude toward yourself, not empty self-praise, but honest recognition of effort. You showed up on difficult days, you kept rhythm when no one was watching. You chose to continue when quitting would have been easier. When you acknowledge these things, you create a different relationship with yourself. You are no longer someone who only pushes. You become someone who leads. A leader who knows when to be firm and when to recognize effort. This relationship is essential for a long journey, because no one can live a lifetime in a state of constant self-pressure. Eventually, exhaustion follows. But when you know how to balance effort with recognition, you create a positive loop. Effort creates progress. Progress is acknowledged. Acknowledgement feeds motivation. Motivation supports continued effort. This loop is simple but powerful. It is the foundation of endurance. When you measure the distance you have traveled honestly, you also become more humble. You see that you did not get here only because of talent. You got here because you did not quit. This awareness helps you value process over outcome. And when you value process, you stop rushing. You allow yourself to go deeper. You understand that every step matters. Finally, looking back at the distance you have traveled strengthens your trust in the road ahead. Not because you are certain of the final outcome, but because you are certain of your ability to continue. You know that whatever lies ahead, you already have proof that you can move through it one segment at a time. This trust is quiet, but powerful. It does not need to be spoken. It shows in how you show up each day. And from that steadiness, another important shift begins to form. You are no longer only acting, you begin to see that your actions are reshaping who you are at a deeper level. From here, the journey enters the stage of identity transformation, where repeated choices do not just create results, but create a new person. There is a very subtle boundary between doing something and becoming the person who does it. At first, you act because you decide to. Then you act because you are used to it. And then, an important moment arrives. You act because that is who you are. Identity transformation does not happen in a dramatic instant. It happens quietly, when small choices are repeated long enough to become default. Every repeated action is a vote you cast for the version of yourself you are building. You do not need to declare who you are. You vote through how you show up each day. When you choose to continue without emotion, you vote for the identity of someone resilient. When you finish while things are still rough, you vote for the identity of someone who does not quit. When you return after an off-rhythm day, you vote for the identity of someone who leads themselves. These votes are not impressive at first, but they accumulate, and at a certain point, you no longer have to try to be that person. You already are. This is the real power of repeated action. It does not only change what you do, it changes how you think about yourself. Before, you may have wondered whether you were disciplined enough. Now, that question is no longer necessary, because you have a history of action behind you. That history says you are someone who can keep rhythm. You are someone who can return. You are someone who can continue. As this identity begins to form, many inner struggles fade away. You no longer have to negotiate with yourself every day. You no longer need willpower to drag yourself through small tasks. You simply act. The way you act on things that have already become habits. This does not take away your freedom. It frees you. You no longer spend energy on repeated decisions. That energy is reserved for what truly matters. Identity transformation also changes how you face failure. When your identity is tied to always being right, a small mistake can shake you. But when your identity is tied to always returning, mistakes become part of the journey. You do not question whether you are still that person. You know you are that person, even when you slip, and because of that, you return faster. This is a clear sign of inner maturity. You no longer overreact to small fluctuations. You see everything within a longer frame. Repeated action also creates a very different sense of freedom, not the freedom of doing whatever you want in the moment, but the freedom of not being controlled by short-term impulses. When you have built a solid identity, you do not need to chase every feeling. You choose what aligns with the person you are becoming, and that choice becomes more natural each day. You do not feel like you are sacrificing. You feel like you are living correctly. There is a deep sense of ease when you know your life is being guided by principles you have lived, not just intentions you once held. Identity transformation does not make your life perfect, but it makes your life consistent. And consistency is the foundation of all long-term achievement. When action and identity merge, you no longer need to seek motivation outside yourself. Motivation becomes a natural byproduct of living in alignment with who you are. You no longer ask why you should do this. You do it because it is what someone like you does. This sentence sounds simple, but it carries immense power. Because when you believe an action belongs to who you are, you will do it even when no one is watching. Even when there is no immediate reward. Even when the road is long. And from that quiet consistency, a new person is shaped, not by big promises, but by small choices kept steadily. This is a stage very few people reach, because it requires patience. But once you are here, you are not easily pulled back, because you have not only changed behavior, you have changed how you see yourself. And from this foundation, the next part of the journey opens into a different depth. The depth of living as this new person quietly each day, without needing to prove anything, without needing to display anything, simply continuing. There is a stage in the journey of change where, on the outside, there is almost nothing to show. No obvious turning point, no impressive milestone, no loud praise from others, but inside, something deeply important is happening. A new version of you is being formed in silence. This is the stage where you no longer need to talk much about what you are doing. You do not need to convince anyone. You do not need to prove anything, because the most important shift has already taken place. Change no longer lives in external results, but in how you show up each day. You wake up and do what needs to be done, not because of excitement, not because of pressure, but because this is your rhythm of living. This silence is very different from the silence of delay in the past. Before, silence meant standing still. Now, silence means moving forward. You are not loud, but you are not stopping. You do not need intense emotion to continue. You only need to keep rhythm. And it is within this steady repetition that the new person is strengthened. You begin to notice that you respond differently to familiar situations. Things that once shook you now feel like minor noise. Tasks that once made you hesitate are handled more quickly, not because they are smaller, but because you have grown larger. This change does not come from a single decision. It comes from hundreds of times you chose to continue in silence. No one sees you refuse an old habit. No one sees you return after an off-rhythm day. No one sees you finish while tired, but you see it, and that is enough. The new person does not need an audience to exist. That person exists because you have lived by a new standard long enough. When you reach this stage, something interesting happens. You are no longer pulled by external validation the way you once were. Praise no longer excites you excessively. Silence from others no longer makes you doubt yourself. You have a stable source of validation inside. You know what you are doing, you know why you are doing it, and you know that if you continue, results will arrive in their own time. This calmness is not indifference, it is steadiness. It allows you to focus more deeply, to do better work, and to go farther. The new person also has a different relationship with time. You are no longer rushing, you are no longer impatient to see results immediately. You understand that what you are building is a foundation, and foundations need time to become solid. Instead of asking when you will arrive, you ask whether you kept rhythm today. This question is simple, but it keeps you aligned. And each day you answer that question with action. The new person is carved a little deeper. There may be moments when you feel you are moving slowly, but if you look closely, you will see that you are no longer moving in circles like before. You are walking a straighter path, maybe not fast, but not lost. And that is a significant achievement, because most people do not fail because they move slowly. They fail because they move forward, then turn back, then move again, then stop entirely. When you keep rhythm in silence, you break that loop. You step out of the old orbit. The new person also changes how you see the people around you. You no longer need to compare yourself constantly. You understand that everyone is moving at a different rhythm. You respect your own process and the process of others. This reduces a great deal of social tension. You do not need to race. You only need to move at your own rhythm. And when you do that, you become much harder to pull off course. This daily silence is where real strength is accumulated. Not the strength that shows off, but the strength of someone who knows they can rely on themselves. You have built a person who can continue even when no one reminds them, even when there is no surge of motivation, even when there are no immediate results. This is a crucial stage, because it prepares you for the final choice of the journey. The choice is not what you will do next. The choice is how you will commit to living from today onward. And that choice will close this journey with a clear anchor point. An anchor that is not loud, but strong enough for you to carry into the rest of your life. 15. This journey does not close with a loud moment of victory. It closes with a quiet truth that carries great weight. Your life is not decided by what you understand, but by what you choose to repeat. Everything you have just moved through was not meant to create temporary emotion. It was meant to bring you to a clear choice. A choice about how you will live from today onward. You have seen that control does not come from waiting. It comes from small actions held consistently. You have seen that fear does not disappear before you move. It only changes position when you move enough times. You have seen that progress matters more than perfection. Finishing matters more than looking right. And consistency matters more than bursts. These truths are not new. But how you live with them from today will decide everything. The final commitment is not a big promise to the world. It is a quiet agreement with yourself. An agreement that you will not abandon yourself on difficult days. An agreement that you will return when you fall out of rhythm. An agreement that you will continue even when there is no emotional support. You do not need to change your entire life in one day. You only need to choose one thing small enough to keep from today. One action you can do even when tired. One principle you do not negotiate with yourself. When you hold that one thing, you are holding the key to control. Because control does not live in how much you do. It lives in whether you keep your word. There may be days when you doubt. Days when you wonder whether all this effort is worth it. On those days, do not look for answers in a distant future. Look at today. Ask yourself one simple question. Today, which action aligns with the person I have chosen to become? When you answer that question with action, even a small one, you close the loop of doubt. You do not need certainty about the final outcome. You only need certainty about the next step. This is the choice you carry from today. Not the choice to live more easily, but the choice to live more clearly. Clear about standards, clear about rhythm, clear about no longer handing control to waiting. When you live with this choice long enough, you will not need to repeat this journey in words. Your life will speak for you, through how you show up, through how you keep your word, through how you continue in silence. And when you look back, you will realize that the greatest change was not in what you achieved, it was in who you became. Someone who no longer stands on the sidelines of their own life. Someone who stepped in, kept rhythm, and moved forward. From today, you have reached the end of this journey. And if you are still here, it shows that a very deep part of you is ready to live differently. What you have just heard is not a story meant to create temporary emotion. It is a complete picture that shows why life does not change when you wait, but changes when you keep a rhythm of action each day. You have seen that control does not come from explosive motivation, but from small movements repeated consistently. That fear is not the enemy, but a sign that you are standing at the edge of growth. That progress matters more than perfection. Finishing matters more than looking right, and consistency quietly reshapes who you become. This is not pressure. This is a reminder that you do not need to change your entire life starting today. You only need to choose one action small enough to keep and return to it every day. Thank you for giving your time and attention to walk through this journey fully. If this content gave you a new perspective or made you pause and reflect on how you are living, take one small action right now. Press like to support the channel, share this video with someone you think needs to hear it, and subscribe to continue walking alongside stories that help you keep rhythm, keep control, and move farther each day.